أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما نافعا اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the Reflections on the Risale-i Nur by Bediuzzaman Said Nursi podcast series. This is Mustafa Tuna. You can listen to the episodes of this series wherever you listen to your podcasts or at the website www.reflections-rn.org. Inshallah, a rough translation of the text that we will be reflecting upon today will be posted at this website too. Go to podcasts, then the words, then the 13th word. And as this indicates, today inshallah we are starting the 13th word. This treatise follows in the wake of the 12th word and continues the discussion of the comparison of the lessons, wisdoms of the Qur'an and the lessons and wisdoms of philosophy that has not been guided by revelation. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of God, the merciful, the mercy giver. This treatise is inspired by and therefore in a sense an interpretation of two verses. The first one is أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وننزل من القرآن ما هو شفاء ورحمة للمؤمنين. And we send down from the Quran that which is healing and mercy to those who believe. This is the 17th chapter of the Quran, the 82nd verse. And وَمَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ الشِّعْرَ وَمَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُ. We have not taught the Prophet poetry, nor could he ever have been a poet. And this is the 36th chapter of the Quran, the 69th verse. So let's read the meanings, interpretations of these verses again. And we send down from the Quran that which is healing and mercy to those who believe. So there is healing and mercy in the Quran that is for those who believe, for believers. And we have not taught the Prophet poetry, nor could he ever have been a poet. The Prophet ﷺ was not reciting poetry. He was not authoring poetry, and he could not have been a poet. So what does Ustad Nursi make of these verses? Kur'an-ı Hakim ile felsefe ulumunun mahsulü hikmetlerini, ders-i ibretlerini, derece-i ilimlerini muvazene etmek istersen şu gelecek sözlere dikkat et. If you want to compare the products of the wisdoms of the Wisdomful Qur'an and the sciences of philosophy, as well as the lessons of their teachings and the levels of their knowledge, pay attention to the words to come. The 13th word is composed of two sections that Ustad Nursi has called stations. The first one is this relatively more straightforward discourse about the comparison of the Quran and the sciences of philosophy, and we will read it. And then the second station is mostly addenda to this treatise that is from lessons that Ustad Nursi had given elsewhere in other contexts, and the theme that connects these two stations is the comparison of the Quran and the wisdom of sciences in a more theoretical discourse in the first station, and in the second station we see how that is put into practice. He has lessons to the youth, he has lessons to prisoners, etc., etc. How do you live the Quran? How do you live a life that is guided by the Quran and that is protected from the falsehood that emanates from the philosophies, various ways of thinking that are not guided by revelation? So if you want to compare the products of the wisdoms of the Wisdomful Qur'an and the sciences of philosophy, so there are two competing approaches to what we are doing here in this world. One is guided by revelation and the latest and most perfect and complete form of that revelation that has ever come to humankind is the Quran. And the other is not guided by revelation, not guided by one who knows everything altogether with an encompassing knowledge, the product of perhaps intelligent, genius human beings who are groping around with the limited senses and information and access to reality that they have in this world. And we have completely different and differing consequences come out of those two wisdoms, come out of those two sources. Because the second one refuses to acknowledge reality as reality is, in its inability to see it as it is, even though it may be sincere, even though it may be guided by the intellects of really smart people and perhaps even good-willed people within limits, it does not get you to where you would want to be if you saw reality as reality is. İşte Kur'an-ı Mucizül Beyan'ın bütün kainattaki adiyat namıyla yad olunan harikulade ve birer mucize-i kudret olan mevcudat üstündeki adet ve ülfet perdesini keskin beyanatıyla yırtıp o hakaik acibe-i zişura açıp nazar ibretlerini celbedip okule tükenmez bir hazine-i ulum açar. This is a very important concept that is coming. It is one of those paradigm changers. It can, if grasped fully, it can help a person to see the world in a different light. What is it? Here is that of the Quran of miraculous exposition, the wisdom, right? We are talking about the wisdoms of and the products of the wisdoms of the Quran and philosophy of sciences. Here is that of the Quran of miraculous exposition, with its sharp statements, incisive, sharp statements. It tears apart, pierces through the veil of custom and familiarity from over the existing beings that are called by the name of ordinary beings, yet are each extraordinary and a miracle of power. So we live in a world. We are born into it. And as we grow up, we accumulate data. We accumulate pieces of information by seeing things, hearing things, smelling things, tasting things. We learn and we start to recognize that there are patterns in this world. And then we start to accept this as normal, as the norm. It is just the way it is, we say, or we think. And then it starts to feel ordinary to us. We don't see what a miracle is actually going on in there. There comes the spring, there shoot the leaves, there bloom the trees, there come to life all those little eggs of insects and birds and whatnot. And we think, this is the way it is. It has always happened that way. There's, what is the big deal about it, right? We lose our sense of wonder and amazement in the face of this wonderful, wondrous, and amazing world. But with its sharp statements, the Quran of miraculous exposition tears apart the veil of custom and familiarity from over the existing beings that are called by the name of ordinary beings. Yet they are not ordinary beings. We need to put away that veil. They are not ordinary beings. They are each extraordinary and a miracle of power. There's nothing ordinary about a wheat germinating under the soil and then shooting that little green leaves and then growing and becoming a stalk and then producing these seeds, and those seeds drying up, and then us being able to take it and grind and have flour and bake it into bread and eat. And that bread has, if it is not contaminated and corrupted by human intervention, has the perfect match for what we need in our body. There is knowledge, there is intent, there is specification, there is power in this. It is miraculous in the sense that it incapacitates us human beings from being able to bring an analog to it, something like it. We cannot do it. With all this technology and knowledge and institutions that are dedicated to research and so much money going into it and so on and so forth, we cannot do anything like that. When we try to do it, we think that we have brought about something that is similar to it, but then we start to recognize that while the first one was pure and healing and just a perfect match with what we need, the second one that we have brought into our world somehow doesn't work in the same way. It gives us satiation, but it does not give us the nutrition. What an amazing thing that is. With its sharp statements, the Quran tears apart the veil of custom and familiarity from over the existing beings that are called by the name of ordinary beings, yet are each extraordinary and a miracle of power. It reveals those amazing truths before conscious beings, draws to itself the sights that are open to lessons, and opens up an unending treasure of sciences for the intellects. But so there is a condition. It reveals those amazing truths, that they are apparent and visible, revealed, disclosed here in clear sight before conscious beings, for those who have the ability to perceive. It draws to itself the sights that are open to lessons. So there are sights that are not open to lessons, that just don't want to see, that want to close their eyes. How can you show something to one who wants to close his or her eyes? The Quran draws to itself the sights of those who are willing to see, who are willing to learn, receive lessons, who are willing to be edified, and opens up an unending treasure of sciences for the intellects. This cosmos, huge, massive, intricate, full of so many different and differing varieties, species, individuals. Each individual is a character. So much specification and designation, and so much collaboration and mutual assistance and harmony. The study of that is an unending treasure. It is full of wisdom and lessons and amazements for those who are willing to listen and see and receive lessons, who are not caught up in the world and in their pride and vain desires and fallen into heedlessness. That is the Quran. Felsefe hikmeti ise bütün harikulade olan mucizat-ı kudreti adet perdesi içinde saklayıp cahilane, lakaydane üstünde geçer. Yalnız harikuladelikten düşen ve intizam-ı hilkatten huruç eden ve kemal-i fıtrattan sukut eden nadir fertleri nazarı dikkate arz eder. Onları birer ibretli hikmet diye zişura takdim eder. As for the wisdom of philosophy, again, this is philosophy that is not guided by revelation. Otherwise, Ustad Nursi does not have a chip on his shoulder about philosophy. He does not have a grudge against philosophy. He does not have a grudge against civilization and modern. He doesn't have a grudge against anything. He has a keen eye. He looks and sees what is good and what is bad. And philosophy that is not guided by revelation is the product of hubris, rejection of reality. Good cannot come from that which does not correspond to reality. That's it. Unless accidentally. But then you do not attribute it to it because it did not mean it. As for the wisdom of philosophy, it conceals the miracles of power that are all extraordinary. It conceals them under the veil of ordinary custom and moves over them ignorantly and indifferently. Sometimes we take a road trip, go on a long journey by car. We drive, keep driving and driving and driving. How many stories are there in plain sight outside of the car that we are driving? So many houses, perhaps farms, perhaps trees, perhaps mountains, perhaps rocks, perhaps rivers, perhaps human beings, perhaps animals. So many different stories, so many different amazing things happening outside the car. But especially if you are a passenger and who is perhaps has a book in his or her hand and just reading it. Nowadays we have those DVD things in the cars. Perhaps your kids are sitting in the back and watching their DVD cartoon movie which they had watched 5 times before, and because now that they are in the car and there is nothing else to do, and I'm putting this in quotation marks right in, there is nothing else to do, they are watching the DVD, the screen, and they are blind, they are heedless, they have no idea what is going on outside that car. Had they not become heedless by the small limited preoccupation that is in their hands or before their eyes, they could have looked out and seen the amazing scenery that's out there. But they are not doing it. That's how we live in this world. Once we forget reality, once we lose our connection with reality, once we lose our sense of wonder, by custom, by training, socialization, by not being reminded about the reality as reality is, by falling prey to the traps of that wisdom of philosophy that is not guided by revelation, we lose sight. We lose sight of the miracles of power that are all extraordinary. If you read literature from all the times, like pre-modern times, or perhaps as modernity is hitting, but not fully transform the world that we live in. No TV, no radio, no cassette players, no recorded imagery and sound, except for books. But there is limited access to books, and not everybody is literate. You will see how people were out there in the nature, looking and having joy, enjoying it, enjoying the reality as it is, instead of being trapped in a virtual reality that is not reality, that is fiction. But not being reminded of that reality, the wisdom of philosophy, right, born out of hubris, not guided by revelation, conceals the miracles of power that are all extraordinary under the veil of ordinary custom, and moves over them, steps on them, ignorantly and indifferently, and I would add here, disrespectfully. Think about the amount of disrespect we have to the world that we live in, how we are ruining it. Think about it. When we do not see the miracle of power that's happening in there, we stop attributing value to it. We stop thinking about the preciousness of it. If you were carrying a delicate work of art that is worth $3 million in your hand, something that's really delicate and fragile, that if it fell, it would break. Or if you shook it too much, it would break. You would be walking with care and attention, and you would be watching your steps and what you are carrying. If you were carrying a newly born baby in your arms, you would be careful about that. Perhaps on a very hot sunny day, you could possibly go outside under the sun and walk there, expose yourself to the scorching rays of the sun, and perhaps put yourself in the danger of heat stroke or something like that. But you are much less likely to do the same while you carry the baby in your arms, unless you have to. Right? You protect it. To the extent that you attribute value to something and recognize its preciousness and fragility, you pay attention and you are careful about it. Is that what we are doing to this earth, to this world in which we are living? No. We don't see the preciousness and the delicacy that is in it. We are not fearful of intervening ignorantly and unfairly and unjustly and ruining it, and we are doing that. It only presents to the attention of sights those individuals that fall beneath extraordinary, diverges from the orderliness of creation, and descends beneath the perfection of innate nature. So here is one of those paradigm changes. Because of custom and familiarity, we think that what is happening on a regular basis is ordinary and worthless, and when something changes that pattern, something happens out of that regular occurrences that we are used to and we are familiar with, we think that that is extraordinary. But Ustad Nursi is telling us, no, that is not what's extraordinary. What is extraordinary is the miracle of power that you are seeing on a daily basis, that you are waking up every day and seeing the sun rise. That's a miracle of power. That's not ordinary. That there is something going on in it and about it. But this wisdom of philosophy that has lost its way presents to the attention of science those individuals that fall beneath extraordinary. For instance, one day you woke up and you see that there is something in front of the sun. There is a lunar eclipse. That is also something. That is also extraordinary, but it is not less extraordinary than the rise of the sun on a daily basis. But this wisdom of philosophy thinks the rising of the sun is just ordinary, and it is only extraordinary when something happens that breaks that pattern. It diverges from the orderliness of creation. So something that diverges from the orderliness of creation, and Said Nursi will give examples here, so I don't want to go too far, and descends beneath the perfection of innate nature. So the lunar eclipse is still perfect. It indicates a perfection that is built into this amazing system. But there are things that fall beneath that perfection. Üstad Nursi is going to give the example now. Mesela en cami bir mucize-i kudret olan insanın hilkatini adi deyip lakaytlıkla bakar. Fakat insanın kemali hilkatinden huruc etmiş, 3 ayaklı yahut 2 başlı bir insanı bir velvele-i istirabla nazarı ibrete teşhir eder. For instance, it considers this philosophy that is not guided by revelation. It considers the creation of the human being, who is a most comprehensive miracle of power. What is the human being? A most comprehensive miracle of power. Which human being? Any human being. All human beings. All babies. All teenagers. All adults. All elder people. They are all miracles of power. But this philosophy considers the human being, who is a most comprehensive miracle of power, to be ordinary, and looks at it with indifference. Yeah, happening every day. There are 7 billion of them. So what's the big deal? Big deal that every human being, almost every human being, are born with 2 arms, and they have hands, and they have 5 fingers at the tips of their hands, and they have tactile abilities. They can grab things and manipulate things, and perhaps write, perhaps type, perhaps cut, perhaps do this, perhaps do that. What's extraordinary about that? That everybody does that. Is that the right way to approach this? It is not. It is not the right way to approach this. There is a miracle of power happening there in the palms of every human being, in the hands of every human being. They have 5 fingers, and they work in a perfect mechanism. They have a thumb and 4 fingers, and the thumb and the 4 fingers work together to grab things, to grasp things, to turn things, to pull things, to push things, to squeeze things. What an amazing thing that is. And we have 7 billion of them, about 7 billion of them right now on Earth. And everybody has 2 of them. But philosophy that is not guided by the wisdom of the Qur'an, by revelation, considers the creation of the human being, who is a most comprehensive miracle of power, to be ordinary, and looks at it with indifference. However, with a fuss of amazement, it displays a human being who has diverged from the perfection of human creation, perhaps with 3 feet or 2 heads, to the sides that are open to lessons. So there are people are willing to listen, willing to receive lessons, get lessons, but it is the lesson that is being given, that is being offered. This philosophy of sciences tells them, look, what an amazing thing. This man, right, has 3 hands. Yes, that's amazing too. That's a miracle of power too. But it's a miracle of power that shows us the miracle of power in the 7 billion people that have 2 hands. It says to us, it tells us, look, this is happening with intent. There is one who is in charge, who is given 2 hands to every one of the 7 billion people who are living on Earth now, who is giving it to them out of his mercy. He could have made 3 hands, one of which is dysfunctional and preventing them from being able to function in the perfect way that they are able to do so in this world. He could have done that. See, it is within his power, but he is not doing it. He is designating 2 hands. He is specifying every human being, with the exception of these lessons that he is offering, with 2 hands, and that is miraculous. That is miraculous. But that philosophy considers the creation of the human being, who is a most comprehensive miracle of power, to be ordinary, and looks at it with indifference, with a fuss of amazement. It makes a fuss. It displays a human being who has diverged from the perfection of human creation. So there is a perfection in the human creation, and we see it in the creation of about 7 billion people. But we don't recognize the perfection in that, and we are amazed and fall into this wondrous state in which we should say, Subhanallah, glory be to God, who has created the human body and mind and soul with such perfection. We don't say it, we just focus on what happens to fall beneath that for perfection, and think that is what's amazing, with 3 feet or 2 heads. That's not it. That is not what is amazing. The amazing thing is that we are created in such a perfect way, and then on top of it, as an added layer, yes, there is amazement in the creation of human beings with 3 hands or 2 heads, or some are created blind, some are created with missing extremities, and so on and so forth, and they will be compensated in the hereafter for what they are missing here. So this is within the realm of justice, and there is a lesson to be learned from that too. And that lesson is that what we falsely think of the ordinary state itself is amazing, and there's a miracle of power in that, and the one who creates it in this way could have created in that way. Out of his mercy, he is giving us what we need. We need to recognize that mercy, that will, that power, that knowledge. Mesela en latif ve umumi bir mucize-i rahmet olan, bütün yavruların hazine-i gaybtan muntazam iaşelerini adi görüp küfran perdesini üstüne çeker. Fakat intizamdan şuzuz etmiş, kabilesinden cüda olmuş, yalnız olarak gurbete düşmüş, denizin altında olan bir böceğin bir yeşil yaprakla iaşesini görür, ondan tecelli eden lütuf ve keremle bütün hazır balıkçıları ağlatmak ister. Haşiye, Amerika'da aynen bu vaka olmuştur. For instance, it pulls the veil of disbelief and denial over the orderly provision of all infants from the treasure of the unseen. We talked about this before. Babies, when they are born, in mammals like human beings, cows, sheep, whales, all mammals, when they are born, their mothers have milk ready for them, and that milk is the perfect nutrition for what that baby needs at that stage of its development. Move forward 3 months, the baby still needs milk, but it needs a different kind of milk with some different nutrition, and the milk that the mother provides for that baby is the perfect match for what that baby needs. Isn't there a miracle of mercy in this? Chicks, birds lay their eggs and sit on it, and then there come out the chicks, and those chicks need particular types of nutrition. So for instance, some of them need more protein at the earlier stages of their development so that they can grow bigger and start flying. Like this takes, let's say, a month, and during that month it happens, right? It happens as if it is happening by itself, right? The one who has power and will and knowledge and mercy makes that. There are an abundance of insects that their mothers can catch and bring to these chicks. And after that, those chicks, once they start flying, they need less protein, but they need more energy, more carbohydrates in order to keep moving around, and you start to see seeds ripening on weeds and falling, and they go and pick those seeds. Now they have more carbohydrates to feed their bodies as they are flying around and using so much energy. Isn't that a miracle of mercy? It pulls the wisdom of philosophy, pulls the veil of disbelief and denial, says this is accidental, this has evolved over time by many probabilities and possibilities coming together through the convergence of various causes. The nature did it. It takes away intent and knowledge and power and will and designation from this and says, just happens. It pulls the veil of disbelief and denial over the orderly provision of all infants from the treasure of the unseen, which is a most subtle and general, covering everything, miracle of mercy. However, so it's happening every day, every hour, every moment, and it doesn't see that this is extraordinary. However, it sees the provision with a green leaf of an insect, which, having fallen under the sea, has become an exception to the order, separated from its tribe, and become a stranger in foreign lands. It wants to make all the present fishermen weep over witnessing the favor and munificence that is manifest in this. So what is this? This is something that Ustad Nursi seems to have read in the newspaper. There is a side note, and in the side note he says, in America, this event has taken place exactly as narrated. So apparently, fishermen noticed that at one point there was this land insect that's supposed to be living outside on land, right? It has fallen in water, under the water, but was somehow saved in there with the presence of a green leaf. Perhaps the leaf trapped some air, and the insect was able to breathe with that trapped air and eat the leaf and live there. So, yeah, this is news, right? This is news. When the dog barks, it's not news. When the dog bites the man, it is not news. It happens all the time. But if a man bites the dog, that's news, right? What is happening outside of the orderly perfection, that becomes the new news. Disorderliness, imperfection, that is what we are focusing on. Yes, that has a lesson too, as we said before. If there was no imperfection, we would be oblivious to perfection. We would not recognize the mercy, the bliss, the power, the designation in it. But does this mean that there is the imperfect now, we should not recognize what is perfect as perfect? There is a way of thinking that makes things serve the opposite of what they are created for. Imperfections are created to highlight perfections, while we are walking around this in our lives about this world, being indifferent to perfection and focusing on imperfection. That's the corruption of the innate nature. That's the corruption of what we are created for. That philosophy that has influenced all of our thinking today, that is not guided by revelation, sees the provision with a green leaf of an insect, which, having fallen under the sea, has become an exception to the order, separated from its tribe, and become a stranger in foreign lands. Yes, there is amazement in that too. The one who designates provision for each and every creature has designated its provision, its sustenance there under the water. That's also amazing. As long as we do not lose sight of the perfection and mercy that characterizes the provision of those insects who are on land, it wants to make all the present fishermen weep over witnessing the favor and munificence that is manifest in this. And yes, the fishermen who are present there should weep over being filled with this high emotions upon witnessing the favor and munificence that is manifest in this. Yes, that is true. They should witness the favor and munificence that is manifest in that, but provided that this does not prevent them from being able to witness the favor and munificence that is manifest in the provision of each and every insect and bird and animal and human being and plant and whatnot, every day, everywhere. İşte Kur'an-ı Kerim'in ilim ve hikmet ve marifet ilahiye cihetiyle servet ve gınası, felsefenin ilim ve ibret ve marifeti sani cihetindeki fakr ve iflasını gör, ibret al. Yes, see the wealth and sufficiency of the noble Qur'an from the point of view of knowledge, wisdom, and divine gnosis, and see the poverty and bankruptcy of philosophy from the point of view of knowledge, moral lesson, and gnosis of the Maker. The noble Qur'an, right, provides you with knowledge, with wisdom, and divine gnosis, knowledge of God, when it presents reality to you in the way that it presents. It does not conceal the reality of reality. It exposes it. It says, look at the sun as it is rising. Isn't this amazing? It doesn't take away from the amazement of the rising of the sun that it is happening every day. It has happened for probably 5 billion years or so on this earth. It doesn't take away from its amazing. It's amazing every day. It was amazing yesterday. It is amazing today. It will be amazing tomorrow. And if it doesn't rise the following day, that will be amazing too. It is going to hammer into our obstinate minds that it was amazing for 5 billion years. But it may be too late. It may be too late then. See the wealth and sufficiency of the noble Quran. It doesn't need anything else it doesn't need any further assistance to clarify things for you. It is self-sufficient. It has so much wealth that the Quran is sufficient from the point of view of knowledge, wisdom, and divine gnosis. And see the poverty and bankruptcy of philosophy from the point of view of knowledge, moral lesson, and the gnosis of the Maker. It is bankrupt when it comes to receiving moral lessons from what we are seeing. It is bankrupt when it comes to seeing the reality of things. It is bankrupt when it comes to telling us about the Maker of these things. And take your lesson, right? Ustad says, take your lesson. The big problem is that this philosophy of science, knowledge, that is not guided by revelation, actually takes pride in not telling you anything about the Maker, about confining itself to within a box that it calls the nature, and trying to figure out how one thing is tied up to another thing, and thinks that this is wisdom. There is wisdom in it, but it is not wisdom. The real wisdom is to be able to see outside the box, to see the owner and creator and sustainer of the box. What good is it if you see how things are tied up to one another in this box, if the box is doomed to being destroyed within an undefined period of time, because each human being's box is destroyed when they die, and nobody knows when they are going to die. But at most, give it 100 years. What's going to happen after that? What good is it that you know that oxygen and hydrogen come together and make water, and water expands when it freezes, and at such and such temperature water evaporates, and such temperature water freezes, and there are 3 states of three major states of matter, which is solid and gas and liquid and whatnot. These are all useful from a mechanical point of view to tie things to one another and make tools with them. And that's also good. That's also important and useful. And we should have that information and knowledge too. But what good is it if it will all come to an end and we do not see that which is permanent, that which is permanently embedded in their essence, in their nature, to show us something that is higher and loftier and further and beyond, and that will last. What good is there in that? If we don't take what is to last from it, but limit ourselves to what is here and now and passing and transient, and will not stay with us, and when it departs will only leave sorrow and torn hearts behind. What is good? What is the good in that? İşte bu sırdandır ki Kur'an-ı Hakim nihayetsiz parlak yüksek hakikatleri cami olduğundan şiirin hayalatından müstahnidir. Evet, Kur'an-ı Mucizül Beyan'ın i'caz derecesindeki kemal nizam ve intizamı ve Kitab-ı Kainat'taki intizamat-ı sanatı muntazam üsluplarıyla tefsir ettikleri halde manzum olmadığının diğer bir sebebi de budur ki it is among the aspects of this secret that the Quran of miraculous exposition is presenting what we see all around in its amazing state and pointing out the miracle in everything. It is among the aspects of this secret that because the Wisdomful Qur'an is endlessly brilliant and gathers elevated truths in itself, it is self-sufficient above the fanciful imageries and imaginations of poetry. It is self-sufficient. It doesn't need the fanciful imageries of poetry. It is already presenting amazing realities. It does not need to embellish it further because what it is presenting is perfectly embellished. Yes, one of the reasons for the Quran of miraculous exposition not being versified, not being put into poetry, despite the miraculous degree of its perfect order and orderliness, and despite that it interprets the orderliness of artistry in the book of the cosmos in a well-ordered style, is this. The Quran is not written in the style of poetry. It is not written with poetic rhythm. It is not written with rhyme. It does not resort to artificial embellishments. But it is beautiful. It is orderly. It sounds perfectly resonant and harmonious. So it is not deficient in that sense. It is not less than poetry. It is more than poetry. And if we want to understand how this is happening and why this is the case, why the Quran does not need to stoop down to the level of poetry, and this is not to belittle poetry, it is just to explain and clarify the elevated status of the Quran above poetry, right? If you want to understand that, Ustad Nursi says, take a look at this. This is the reason. What is the reason? Or this is the explanation. Ayetlerinin her bir necmi vezin kaydı altına girmeyip ta ekser ayetlere bir nevi merkez olsun ve kardeşi olsun ve mabeynlerinde mevcut münasebet-i maneviyeye rabıta olmak için o daire-i muhita içindeki ayetlere birer hatt-ı münasebet teşkil etmesidir. Güya serbest her bir ayetin ekser ayetlere bakar birer gözü, müteveccih birer yüzü var. Kur'an içinde binler Kur'an bulunur ki her bir meşrep sahibine birisini verir. Nasıl ki 25. sözde beyan edildiği gibi Sure-i İhlas içinde 36 Sure-i İhlas miktarınca her biri zil ecniha olan 6 cümlenin terkibatından müteşekkil bir hazine-i ilmi tevhid bulunuyor ve tazammun ediyor. Each of the stars of its verses, the Quran's verses, avoids being restricted by rhythm, poetic rhythm, so that it can be a focal center for and brother to most other verses. Because, as we know, in a work of poetry, each verse relates to the verse that's coming before it and after it, and it's stuck there. You cannot take that verse from that location and maybe move 10 lines below and try to connect it with the verse that comes there. It doesn't work. There might be one rhyme or one rhythm that runs through everything, but the meaning won't connect. Something will not work. The perfection of poetry is in everything being in the particular place that it is. So the Quran has that kind of perfection, but that is not the limit of its perfection. Its perfection, one of the aspects of its perfection is that each verse is able to relate to the entirety of the Quran. Each of the stars of its verses avoids being restricted by poetic rhythm so that it can be a focal center for and brother to most other verses. And it draws connecting lines to the verses in that circle. So it is like a center. Each verse is like a center, and each circle has a circle around it of many verses that it connects to. It draws connecting lines to the verses in that circle to serve as bonds for the metaphysical relationship that exists between them. And now imagine how rich the meaning would be if each verse could connect to many other verses in many different ways and indicate or point to or allude to or clarify new meanings because of the various contexts that it draws around itself. It is as if each free verse, that is a verse that is not bound by rhythm or rhyme, it is as if each free verse has an eye looking at most other verses and a countenance facing them. There exist thousands of Quran in the Quran. So there's one Quran composed of 6,000 something verses, but within that Quran there are thousands of Quran, depending on how you are able to see those relationships between verses and how you are able to move from one verse to another to another to another in different places, following those lines that are drawn in that circle by that verse that you started with. There exist thousands of Qur'ans in the Quran, and it gives theirs to the people of each disposition. So to each individual, it gives what its particular human disposition needs at the particular moment. It gives theirs to the people of each disposition. This is similar to the way, as explained in the 25th word, and of course Ustad Nursi added this later on. The 25th word should come later, and inshallah we will come to it. It is about the miraculousness of the exposition of the Quran. So this is similar to the way as it is explained in the 25th word, that there is a treasure of the science of monotheism, there's a treasure of the knowledge, science of monotheism in the chapter of Ikhlas, which is the 112th chapter of the Quran, that is composed of the combinations of the 6 each multifaceted sentences. That chapter is composed of 6 verses, 6 sentences, 6 each multifaceted sentences to the number of and entailing 36 chapters of Ikhlas. So in the 25th word, Ustad Nursi gives us a detailed interpretation of this chapter, Surah Al-Ikhlas, the chapter of Ikhlas, sincerity. It is one of the most important chapters of the Quran. It gives us a beautiful summary of the creed of monotheism, right? And it is 6 sentences, but Ustad Nursi shows that within those 6 sentences, in the way that those sentences relate to one another in different ways, you end up having 36 chapters of Ikhlas. 36 harmonious, mutually supporting ways of reading that chapter. Evet, nasıl ki semada olan intizamsız yıldızların sureten ademi intizamı cihetiyle her bir yıldız kayıt altına girmeyip her birisi ekser yıldızlara bir nevi merkez olarak daire-i muhitasındaki birer birer her bir yıldıza mevcudat beynindeki nispeti hafiyeye işaret olarak birer hatt-ı münasebet uzatıyor. Güya her bir tek yıldız necmi ayet gibi umum yıldızlara bakar birer gözü, müteveccih birer yüzü vardır. İşte intizamsızlık içinde kemal intizamı gör, ibret al. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. وَمَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ الشِّعْرَ وَمَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُ nin bir sırrını bil. As Ustad Nursi referred to the verses of the Quran as stars, right? He is now going to explain us that metaphor, and he's going to show us how the stars in the sky are like the Quran, miraculous, and how there is that correspondence between the book of Revelation and book of creation. Yes, how from the point of view of the seeming lack of orderliness among the disorderly stars on the sky. So you look and it's like as if, just sprinkled there. That's why they called it Milky Way, right? As if milk, spilled, and there are these splashes of light all around without any designation and specific order. But look careful. Yes, how? From the point of view of the seeming lack of orderliness among the disorderly stars on the sky, each star avoids restriction and being a center for most stars. This is visually, but we can also think of this in terms of gravitation. Right? Each star avoids restriction and being a center for most stars, they each extend a line of connection to every star in their circumference one by one, which is a signifier of the hidden relationship among existent beings. It is as if each single star has an eye looking to all stars like the stars of verses, like the verses in the Quran, which are like stars, and a countenance facing them. Thus, see the perfection of orderliness within lack of orderliness. Its seeming lack of orderliness actually makes it more orderly and more beautiful. There is a perfect order that's happening there that's beyond what you, with your limited abilities, think of as order, the way sometimes we think the rhythm and rhyme in poetry makes it perfect, and because this other text, other narrative is lacking rhythm and rhyme, it needs to be beneath it. No, that's not the case, because the lack of rhythm and rhyme in that other text, the way the stars function in the sky, makes everything in it relate to everything else. It is a higher level and form of perfection. Thus, see the perfection of orderliness within lack of orderliness. Receive your lesson from it. Know one of the secrets of we have not taught the Prophet poetry, nor could he ever have been a poet. Right? This is Quran, chapter 36, verse 69. It's about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Some people said, well, he's just a poet. No. What he is giving to you is not like poetry. And there were companions. There were Arabs living in the society where he was explaining to the people the realities as he received them in revelation. And they were saying, there is something exceptional in what he is saying. This is not like human words. This is not like poetry. We know poetry. We are experts in it. We would recognize poetry when we heard it. This is not like that. And this is not beneath poetry either. This is above poetry. This is above human speech. There has to be something extraordinary about it. Some, just because they recognize this, accepted reality as reality is, and took Shahada, became Muslims, became believers, and some recognized this, but out of their hubris, they could not. So we should make sure that our hubris does not stand on our way to reality and to reunion with our Lord in the hereafter. Hem ayeti ve ma yenbagî leh sırrını da bununla anla ki şiirin şe'ni küçük ve sönük hakikatleri büyük ve parlak hayallerle süslendirip beğendirmek ister. Halbuki Kur'an'ın hakikatleri o kadar büyük, âli, parlak ve revnaktardır ki en büyük ve parlak hayal o hakikatlere nispet edilse gayet küçük ve sönük kalır. Mesela Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. يَوْمَ نَطْوِ السَّمَاءَ كَطَيِّ السِّجِلِّ الْكُتُبِ يُغْشِي اللَّيْلَ النَّهَارَ يَطْلُبُهُ حَثِيثًا إِنْ كَانَتْ إِلَّا صَيْحَةً وَاحِدَةً فَإِذَا هُمْ جَمِيعٌ لَدَيْنَا مُحْضَرُونَ gibi hadsiz hakikatleri buna şahittir. Furthermore, understand the secret of the verse of nor could he ever have been a poet in this way that the Prophet ﷺ could not have been a poet. He was not trying to be a poet. He could not have been a poet. He's above it. So it is not that he could not have ever been a poet because he's beneath it. No, he could not have ever been a poet because he's above it. Understand the secret of that verse in this way that the characteristic of poetry is that it wants to ornament small and dim realities with great and brilliant imagery and thus have people like them. Nevertheless, the realities of the Qur'an are so great, elevated, brilliant, and exquisite that, compared to those realities, even the greatest and most brilliant imagery would remain small and dim. You cannot exaggerate reality. You cannot embellish reality further. It is perfect. You cannot make perfection more perfect. Reality is perfect from the point of view of what it needs to be, ontologically, from the point of view of its beauty, and therefore you cannot make it better and more beautiful. And if the purpose of poetry, if the function of poetry is to embellish realities, and sometimes human realities need to be embellished, that makes them look better, etc., etc. So this is not a condemnation of poetry, right? But poetry should know its place. Poetry's place is not to give us knowledge of reality as reality is. Knowledge of reality as reality is in the Quran. That is how it works. Nevertheless, the realities of the Quran are so great, elevated, brilliant, and exquisite that, compared to those realities, even the greatest and most brilliant imagery would remain small and dim. For example, witnesses to this are many of its realities, such as, and Ustad Nursi is here going to give us some examples of verses that especially describe the end of times and how things will change at the time, how the mountains and the skies will be rolled up, etc. Or happenings that, again, because of our custom and familiarity and heedlessness, appear to us as ordinary, but that are actually extraordinary. So listen to these verses. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. يَوْمَ نَطْوِ السَّمَاءَ كَطَيِّ السِّجِلِّ الْكُتُبِ. And of course, this came up in the 12th word too, so it must have been a verse that really made a big impact on Ustad Nursi. On that day, We shall roll up the skies as a writer rolls up scrolls. This is Quran chapter 21 verse 104. Or يغشي الليل النهار يطلبه حثيثا. He makes the night cover the day in swift pursuit. Yeah, it is, when you look at it, it's daylight, brilliant. You can see everything, and all of a sudden there comes darkness and you can see nothing. And especially imagine this before the invention of electricity and electric light. What a huge impact that must have been making on people's spirits, and we lack that now. We are deprived of that now. Or إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون. It was just one single blast, and then, lo and behold, they were all brought before us. They were all brought before us. So these are verses to contemplate. Think about what they are describing. Think about the greatness, miraculousness, brilliance of the realities that they are telling us about. And then we will recognize that they don't need any further embellishment and exaggeration. They are great and perfectly beautiful. All right, we will end here. There is more to this. Inshallah, we will continue in the next episode. For now, سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وآخر دعواهم أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. الفاتحة. الصلوات اللهم صل على